My suitcase was already gone, swallowed by the trunk of a waiting taxi. The boarding pass sat neatly inside my coat pocket, folded with care. Seattle, where I was supposed to meet my first grandchild. A moment that should have felt celebratory instead carried an unexpected weight. As the engine idled outside our Beacon Hill townhouse, a sudden, icy unease crept through me. It wasn't panic. It was instinct. I realized I had left something behind, not the spare copy of Richard's will locked safely in my desk drawer, but the original. The real one. The document with his cramped handwriting in the margins, his private thoughts inked between the lines. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I couldn't leave without it. 5 minutes, I told the driver, already stepping out. The house greeted me with a silence so thick it felt deliberate. I didn't call out for my son, Leo. Something told me not to. The air felt suspended, like the breath before a storm breaks. My shoes made no sound as I moved down the hallway, the Persian runner absorbing each step. That's when I heard voices. They drifted from the library, low, precise, clinical. I stopped just short of the doorway and pressed myself into the shadows. If her memory lapses continue, we have enough to proceed, a man said. His voice was unfamiliar. Sharp. Professional. She's 74, Leo replied. My only child. But she's still sharp most of the time. Sharp is subjective, the man countered calmly. Patterns aren't. Repetition. Misplaced items. Avoidance of financial responsibilities. With documentation, guardianship is straightforward. Guardianship. The word struck me like a physical blow. They weren't discussing a hypothetical. They were discussing me. Leo continued, his voice lower now, almost rehearsed. He mentioned my reading glasses. A story I'd repeated. Tax documents I hadn't reviewed yet. Each sentence felt like another brick laid in a wall I hadn't known was being built around me. I didn't confront them. I didn't gasp or cry out. Instead, something colder and far more dangerous took hold. I backed away silently, my heart pounding but my movements precise. Outside, sunlight spilled across the street, warm and ordinary. I slid back into the taxi, my hands steady in my lap. I didn't tell the driver to go to the airport. In that moment, I realized something essential had shifted. I wasn't being protected. I was being prepared for erasure. I thought that was the worst betrayal I'd ever feel, until I started replaying the past and realized how long this plan had been unfolding. I sent the taxi toward the north end instead. The airport felt impossibly far away now, like another life entirely. My mind replayed the conversation again and again, each word clicking into place with unsettling clarity. I asked the driver to stop near a small Italian bakery Richard and I used to love. The storefront had changed, modernized, but the smell inside, anise, sugar, espresso, was the same. I ordered coffee and sat by the window, letting the heat of the cup ground me. Outside, people hurried past, wrapped in scarves and distractions. Inside, memories stirred. I saw Leo as a boy again, sitting at this very table, stacking sugar packets into elaborate structures while Richard read the newspaper. Leo had always wanted to know how things worked, bridges, buildings, systems hidden beneath the surface. I had fed that curiosity, bringing him books from the engineering shelves, driving him to competitions, celebrating his hunger to build. Somewhere along the way, that instinct to build had shifted into something else. The signs surfaced now, undeniable. His insistence on helping with Richard's estate. replacing our longtime accountant with a firm of his choosing, suggesting I simplify my passwords, then quietly managing them himself. Each act had been framed as care. I had accepted them because I wanted to believe in my son's devotion. I finished my coffee, the bitterness lingering. Home no longer felt safe. It felt compromised. There was only one place left where I trusted myself completely. The library. The Boston Public Library welcomed me like an old ally. Marble floors. Vaulted ceilings. The faint, comforting scent of aging paper. I bypassed the main reading room and headed straight for special collections, where I'd spent decades of my life. The archivist at the desk smiled politely and retrieved Richard's estate file. When the archival box was placed before me, my hands didn't shake. I lifted the lid carefully. The will itself was standard. But Richard had never been a man who relied solely on formalities. His real thinking lived in the margins. And there it was. A faded note clipped to the asset section, written in his familiar angular script. It addressed me directly. Remember the numbers it read. They don't lie. They don't take sides. I turned the pages slowly. Codes. Conditions. Restrictions. Safeguards. He hadn't accused our son. He hadn't warned me with emotion. He had trusted me to understand. He'd rushed through me, not rage, but recognition. I wasn't confused. I wasn't vulnerable. I was late to the truth, but not too late. I pulled out my notebook and began writing a list. What I did next wasn't confrontation, it was preparation. And I was about to become very, very methodical. Underscore 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 underscore. By the time I left the library, dusk had settled into the city. The cold air sharpened my focus. I felt composed, alert, more myself than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made a decision. If Leo was collecting evidence, I would let him. Carefully. On my terms. I found an old digital recorder tucked away in a closet, left over from oral history interviews. It still worked. I tested it once, then concealed it inside a potted fern in the living room, angled toward the sitting area. Then I began the performance. I left the front door unlocked. I made tea and deliberately spilled some on the counter. I filled out the crossword puzzle, and left one easy answer wrong. Small signals. Harmless details. Breadcrumbs. Leo arrived mid-morning, unannounced but predictable. He carried groceries and concern in equal measure. Kissed my cheek. Commented on the temperature in the house. I nodded vaguely. He asked how I was sleeping. I rambled. Changed topics halfway through a sentence. Let my hand tremble slightly as I stirred my tea. His eyes tracked everything. When he noticed an unopened letter from the investment firm, I sighed and said the numbers made my head swim these days. He offered, so generously, to handle it for me. Later I said. After lunch, he leaned against the doorway, voice softening. This was the moment he'd rehearsed. He spoke of assisted living communities, gardens, music programs, memory care specialists. He painted it as comfort, as kindness. I smiled faintly and said it might be nice not to cook anymore. Then I looked at him and asked, very gently, what day it was. The flicker in his eyes told me everything. After he left, I retrieved the recorder and listened to the conversation in full. Every pause. Every carefully chosen word. That afternoon, I called Catherine, an old colleague who had gone into estate law. When she arrived, I didn't dramatize. I handed her the recording and Richard's annotated will. She listened once. Then looked at me and said, "We'll handle this." We revoked the power of attorney that day. This wasn't anger. It was strategy. Leo thought he was documenting my decline, but he had no idea I was building a case that would end his. Underscore 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 underscore. The days that followed felt oddly calm. Catherine gave me a checklist, but I barely needed it. Years in the archives had trained me for this exact kind of work. I started with my doctor. I requested a full cognitive evaluation, baseline, documented, indisputable. When the results came back confirming my mental sharpness, I filed the letter neatly. Exhibit O. I saved receipts, printed emails, logged appointments. Every document was scanned, time-stamped, encrypted. Each detail became a brick in a wall Leo couldn't see but would soon collide with. Then I found something unexpected. In Richard's old correspondence box was a note he'd written to himself years ago. It wasn't long. If Leo ever confuses ambition with entitlement, it read, "Remember, Eleanor's silence is not weakness." I sat with that note for a long time. Leo returned again, this time with brochures and urgency. He mentioned paperwork, timelines, a lawyer who just needed one more statement. I agreed to consider it. He left relieved. 3 days later, Catherine sent our response. Not a letter, a dossier. Medical affidavits. Legal revisions. Recorded evidence. A warning. The lawyer withdrew immediately. That evening, Leo let himself in, furious, holding the letter like an accusation. I didn't raise my voice. I told him the truth. That silence isn't surrender. That observation is not confusion. That he had mistaken my patience for permission. He left without slamming the door. Defeated people rarely announce it loudly. I thought it was over, but reclaiming your life always leaves one final chapter to write. Underscore. The house felt different after Leo left. Not hollow. Not lonely. Spacious. The kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has been lifted. For the first time in weeks, I moved through the rooms without bracing myself, without listening for footsteps or rehearsed concern. The silence was no longer something to fear, it was something I owned. 2 weeks later, Catherine's daughter, Sophie, moved into the spare bedroom while completing her graduate work in archival science. She didn't take up much space, but her presence changed the rhythm of the house. The gentle tapping of her keyboard in the evenings. The smell of fresh coffee in the mornings. A respectful, uncomplicated companionship. She helped me digitize Richard's old photographs, handling each one with the reverence of someone who understood that history lives in details. We worked slowly, methodically, labeling dates, places, names. It felt fitting, preserving the past while reclaiming the present. One evening, we sat in the library. The same room where I had once stood frozen in the shadows, listening to my future being negotiated without my consent. Now the lamps cast a warm glow across the shelves. Sophie worked quietly at the table while I read, the space restored to what it had always been meant to be. I realized then that I hadn't destroyed my relationship with my son. I had corrected it. I had not erased him from my life, I had simply removed him from a position he had never earned. Authority is not inherited. It is entrusted. And that trust, once broken, does not automatically renew. Later that night, I opened my journal and wrote one final entry on the matter. There was no bitterness in my words. No need for triumph. Only clarity. There had been no courtroom battle. No raised voices. No public reckoning. Just facts, carefully gathered. Records, precisely kept. The quiet, undeniable strength of documentation. For decades, I had taught others how to preserve truth, how to protect it from distortion, neglect, and ambition. I had simply forgotten, for a time, to apply that lesson to myself. Age had not made me fragile. It had made me efficient. As I closed the journal, I understood something that felt both sobering and empowering. Survival does not always require noise. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires restraint. And sometimes, it requires waiting until the other side mistakes your silence for absence. My story was never lost. It was only waiting for me to take the pen back into my own hands. Because the most dangerous person is never the loudest one, it's the one who's been quietly recording everything.